American government, political culture. The United States was born free, and its liberation from British rule began in Massachusetts. It was there on a spring morning in 1775 that American colonists first fired upon British soldiers. Paul Revere had ridden through the night to warn local militia that the British were marching in their direction. The militiamen were farmers, merchants, and craftsmen. They numbered less than 100 men. The British force was 10 times larger, and they were regular soldiers, part of the world's finest army. It was no contest. The firing stopped within moments. 8 Americans were dead. The only British casualty was a lightly wounded soldier. But the skirmish came to be known as the shot heard round the world. In that moment, the spirit of democracy had found a fitting vassal, a group of people who were willing to fight to the death to free themselves of their king. From here, the British force marched on Concord, 7 miles to the west. There they faced off against a larger group of local colonial militia. This time, men on both sides fell. As the British marched the 20 miles back to Boston, they were fired upon by Americans positioned in the woods. More than 1,000 Americans, at least one of them 80 years old, had grabbed their muskets and had joined the fight. The British were trained to fight in open fields, not against men protected by rocks and trees. Soon the British were in full retreat. When the British reached Boston, they lost nearly 100 men, double that of the Americans. On that April day, more than 2 centuries ago, Americans fought for a different form of government, one where the people would govern themselves. That vision was idealized later in the words of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The ideas that sparked the American Revolution against Great Britain are today the foundation of America's political culture. Political culture is a term that refers to the deep-seated and widely shared beliefs among the people, beliefs that are so much a part of their thinking that they're almost second nature. Habits of the heart is how French writer and chronicler of early America, Alexis de Tocqueville, described such beliefs in the United States, habits of the heart. While roughly half of the world's nations today are classified as democracies as a result of the cultural differences, they differ markedly in how they're governed. Americans' cultural beliefs originated in the nation's colonial period, when America was composed of individual colonies, which culminated in the American Revolution. Their revolution was a rejection of centuries of tradition around governance. But the revolution was more than just a question of whether ordinary people were capable of governing themselves. It reflected a far-ranging change in the way that ordinary people were beginning to think about their place in the world. In the Europe that American settlers had left behind, power rested in the hands of very few people. Hereditary kings sat atop the political ladder. They ruled by family line or lineage, often with religious sanction. Ordinary people were their subjects, with most people possessing very few opportunities and even fewer rights. It was an age-old system, and the British king tried to impose it on the American colonies. It didn't find root in American soil, however. The American continent was too big, too diverse, and too remote to be tightly governed from afar. It was settled by groups of risk-taking people who valued liberty and independence above tradition. In today's technologically dependent world, it's hard to imagine what the settlers found when arriving in the New World on American soil. Seemingly endless tracts of harsh wilderness only charted by native peoples. That untamed expanse gradually challenged, then changed how people thought about themselves and about the government that they wanted. Why should they bow to a king when a greater equality could be had by moving to the next frontier west? Why should they accept the age-old feudal system when land was freely available and could be made productive by their own hands? Why should they be governed by laws created by a king an ocean away when they knew their governing needs far better than that distant ruler? It was the gradual dawning of these radical beliefs that constituted the real American Revolution, the ideological one. As the nation's second president, John Adams, put it, the American Revolution started first in the minds and hearts of the people. The armed revolution we celebrate today merely served to crystallize what Americans had already come to believe, that they should be free, equal, self-reliant, self-governing. The ideological revolution, not the war itself, is celebrated every July 4th, Independence Day. July 4th, 1776 is when the United States declared independence from Great Britain with a pen, not with a sword or a gun, in a letter. Today, the beliefs nurtured during the colonial period are the cornerstone of America's political culture. They define what it means to be an American. The people of most other countries derive their identity from shared lineage or ancestry. What makes someone French or Chinese, or defines them as a Turk or a Russian? It's the fact that they share a land and a bloodline dated back many, many centuries. The French have a nation that's more than a millennia old. The Chinese have one that's more than 4,000 years old. Americans are different. We do not have a common bloodline. We have an uncommon one. We come from immigrants from every corner of the globe: England, Germany, Italy, Mexico, Ireland, India, Laos, Nigeria, Puerto Rico, etc. So what in the absence of shared ancestry is America's common bond? What do we share? Writing in the late 19th century, the British historian James Bryce said that Americans' identity stems from the ideals that emerged during the colonial period. Bryce was struck by the fact that wherever he traveled in the young United States, people spoke in a shared language steeped in the nation's founding ideals, despite their obvious cultural differences. At the time, the nation was still expanding westward, a frontier experience that further ingrained the beliefs that had sparked the revolution itself. Even today, those ideals, liberty, equality, individualism, self-government, are central to Americans' identities. Collectively, they've been called the American Creed. American Creed. They've been imprinted in Americans' minds by rituals such as Independence Day celebrations, the playing of the national anthem, and the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance. They've also been sustained over time by the words of America's leaders like Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, i.e., government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. But Americans' ongoing embrace of the nation's founding ideals is more than a matter of rituals and rhetoric. Americans, generation after generation, inevitably conclude that their nation's founding ideals are worth keeping: to be free of repressive government, to be the fundamental equal of all others, to be economically independent, and to associate freely and worship God in your own way, and to have a say in your own governance. Those are abiding principles. Even as they struggle to achieve the same degree of selflessness as their forebears, Americans today still intuitively understand that civic engagement, volunteerism, and service to others is a vital responsibility that helps preserve these democratic ideals. High ideals don't come with a guarantee that people, or even entire generations, will live up to them, of course. Clearest proof of that is in our history in the case of African slavery. For 250 years, blacks were brought and sold across the agricultural South as chattel property, subject to the dictates of their white masters. And even when freed by the Civil War, Black Americans continued to suffer second-class status across the nation, particularly the American South. Separately, with the Immigration Act of 1924, Congress imposed a complete ban on Asian immigration, not just Chinese and Japanese, but Koreans, Indians, and other Asians as well. In my lifetime, more recently, anti-Muslim echoes of that ethnocentric sentiment have been heard in response to the threat posed by terror groups like Al-Qaeda. Bigotry undeniably drives such policies. Cultural values are not commandments. They are principles that a free people can either live up to or fall short of. Americans' cultural beliefs represent a particularly high bar, for they are rooted in high ideals. Liberty, for instance, is not a license. It's not a freedom to do whatever you please, however you please, whenever you please. It's rooted in free choice, but it entails a corresponding responsibility. Freedom up to a point where it infringes on the freedom of others. Americans' cultural beliefs also require constant and careful balance. Self-government, for example, implies the right of the majority to rule, whereas liberty implies that individuals have rights beyond the reach of the majority. When majority rule and minority rights come into conflict, each side can say that it has Americans' ideals on its side. And no resort to logic can persuade either side that the other has a more important claim. Yet despite their conflicting implications and unfilled promises, Americans' ideals have left their mark on the nation's politics. It is impossible to understand the course of American history without taking its cultural ideals into account. It's true, for example, that episodes of state-sanctioned discrimination mar the nation's history. It is also true that the struggle of Americans across generations to build a more equal society has long shown the world's oppressed a shining beacon of hope. That is why so many immigrants have chosen to make America their home and continue to do so. Look to our national symbol, the Statue of Liberty, and the poem that adorns it. The New Colossus, written by Emma Lazarus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. So how can we explain the frequent political movements that have sought to make America a more equal place? The There have been scores of such movements, including the effort to free the slaves, the effort to give women the right to vote, and the ensuing women's rights movement. The civil rights movement, for instance, would not have happened without the courage and determination of the African American community. But in order to succeed, the movement also had to have behind it the moral force of Americans' professed belief in equality. In essence, the movement had to carve out for itself a defining place in the centuries-old political culture of the country in order for real, lasting progress to take hold. It was that force that Martin Luther King Jr. summoned when he challenged America to rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal. The nation's political culture gives politics their distinctive form. Cultural beliefs certainly do not determine precisely what a people will do. But in the long run, they affect what a people will regard as appropriate and desirable, and thus what they will try to achieve. Take, for example, Americans' belief in individualism. Although individualism is a part of other political cultures, those of Europe, it takes a preeminent form in the United States because of its unique history as a place where self-reliance and personal ambition carried the day. This landscape was conquered by peoples who embraced individualism. It's in our blood. Such individualism helps explain why so many are hesitant to expand America's social safety net, especially when compared to other wealthy Western nations. This is a topic of much debate. Americans are not less sympathetic with the poor than other peoples. Compared with Europeans, Americans are actually twice as likely to give to charity. But Americans are less inclined to enact welfare policies that could weaken self-reliance, since this is a foundational tenet of our nation's political culture. To Americans, government-run social benefit and welfare programs are less in line with our values than a hand up or direct assistance from a friend or a neighbor. From America's individualistic perspective, people are obligated to work hard and take care of themselves unless they have an obvious need for government help. Public education provides another example of how Americans' cultural values affect its unique policy choices. The United States has easily the world's largest higher education system, more than 4,000 colleges and universities. Most of them are public institutions created by local and state governments and supported in substantial part by local tax dollars. The United States also spends more per pupil for primary and secondary public education than does nearly every country on the planet, even per capita. The European average per student is slightly more than $10,000 annually in today's dollars. The United States spends about $14,000 in the same dollars per student annually. Why is that? Why does the United States invest so heavily in its public education system? Its political culture is the chief reason. If individualism is to be upheld, you have to give people the means, a proper education to succeed as individuals. And if equality is to be upheld, educational opportunities have to be plentiful, available to the many rather than to the few. Thus, equality of opportunity, giving every child the chance to succeed, is the guiding principle of America's system of public education. When that system began to take root 2 centuries ago, it was called the Great Equalizer, our public school system. It sought to give children of widely different backgrounds an equal start in life so that each child could succeed on, or fail, on his or her own merits. Writing in the late 19th century, the socialist Leon Sampson noted the stark difference between the philosophy of public education in the US and of Europe. Said Sampson, the European ruling class were open in their contempt for working people, but in the United States, equality and liberty were extolled in the public schools. Sampson concluded that American schools embodied a unique conception of equality. Americans understood that no guarantee of equality of outcome can be legislated by government, despite their attempts. Government cannot make us all happy or successful, but an equality of opportunity certainly can be provided, and it is the constant goal of American governance. I could give other examples, everything from home ownership rates to gun laws to claims of unequal pay between the sexes that illustrate the impact of America's political culture on its policies. But the point will be the same. Any assessment of U.S. politics must take into account the influence of its cultural values. Our values inform our politics. It's far from the only factor, as we'll see in subsequent lectures, but it's a fundamental one. I'll turn now from American cultural values to the nature of American politics itself. Politics can be described simply as a struggle for who gets what, when, and how. In other words, politics is the process through which a society settles its conflicts over who gets the benefits and who pays for the costs of public policy. Who gets what and who's going to pay. There are 2 basic reasons why conflict sort of coincides with politics. One is scarcity. Even the richest nations richest nations do not have enough wealth to satisfy everyone's demands. Human demands are limitless. Every human on this planet, by their nature, innately desires more than what they have. Such is the human condition. That sets up a conflict over how a nation's resources are to be distributed. Everyone wants a piece of the pie, but the pie is not big enough to give everyone everything that they want. Consider, for example, the difference in the quality of America's public schools. It would be safe for us to assume that wealthy suburban districts have better school facilities than poor and inner city districts. The reason for this is that public schools are financed in large part by taxpayers at the local level. Roughly half of school funding is provided by local taxes, and wealthier communities have a stronger tax base. They pay more in taxes than do their inner city counterparts generally. In an effort to improve their schools, poor districts have pressured state governments to equalize spending across state districts. This type of proposal has been strongly opposed by wealthier districts, obviously because it will inevitably result in their tax dollars, which currently support their own children's schools, leaving and supporting someone else's kid's school. Such conflicts stemming from insufficient resources to satisfy everyone's demands are an everyday part of Americans' politics. Nearly any time that money or other type of resource is made available, people will fight over its distribution. The second major source of conflict in society is values, more precisely, closely held values that diverge. One person's beliefs about what's right and wrong may differ radically from another person's. When such value differences exist around a policy issue, conflict is inevitable. Case in point would be the abortion issue. Ever since the Supreme Court in 1973 found that women have a constitutionally based privacy right to choose an abortion if they would like, within certain limits, the issue has been a persistent source of political conflict among the people. To some, an abortion falls clearly within the realm of individual liberty, and they support a woman's right to choose an abortion. To others, abortion violates the fundamental right to life for the unborn. These are opposing beliefs, and they're largely incompatible. Ever since the Supreme Court's ruling, abortion foes and supporters have been arguing the issue in the courts, through street demonstration in the halls of Congress and across state legislatures. Such seemingly intractable conflicts are an everyday part of our politics. Now, who wins out when there is conflict over resources or values? Which side gets what it wants? The abstract answer is that the winners are those with the most political power, or those that craft the soundest arguments. Power is a basic concept of politics. Political scientists define power as the ability of an actor, such as an individual, group, organization, or institution, to influence policy or control the behavior of others. Influence and control, those are the marks of power. Actors with enough power can impose new taxes or cut taxes, expand or limit access to abortion, increase or reduce welfare benefits, etc. Given what power can do, it's not surprising that much of what happens in politics centers on power, trying to get it, as is the case for campaigning for election, trying to use it, as is the case for lobbying to influence the writing of a new piece of legislation. This quest for power inevitably produces public policy distortions that you and I have to live with. Critics might point to recent efforts to alter election rules, or gerrymander state districts by Republicans, or demands by Democrats to expand social safety benefits that disproportionately vote or benefit their voting base. Student loan forgiveness, for instance. And they do so without a plan to pay for those benefits. When politics is driven primarily by a quest for power, unintended consequences political opportunism creates must be accounted for, generally long after that specific group of politicians has left office. Instead of the pursuit of power, our politics cries out for leaders of integrity and values. Thankfully, divided government, when one party doesn't control both houses of Congress and the presidency, ensures that power cannot be concentrated for long in any one branch or body of the government when we drift away from our political heritage and we get focused on power. Short-term political gains eventually give way to longer-term realities. The pendulum of politics may seem to swing erratically from left to right here in America, but it's actually our shared political culture that continues to keep us centered here in the U.S. when you take the long view.